Here we are, back together again, friends, for another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Today we're going to revisit episode 531, After Dark Diabetes Complications. It originally aired on August 25th, 2001, and I consider it to be a seminal episode of the podcast. This is Mike, a longtime type 1 who is going to thoughtfully and honestly walk you through his life and explain some of the complications that he's had. After you finish with this episode and end up loving Mike, which I believe you will, go find his latest, episode 1221. It's called Condo Shopping. Mike and his wife come on to give an update on his life, and it's very, very interesting. Please don't forget that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. To save 40% off of your entire order at CozyEarth.com, all you have to do is use the offer code JUICEBOX at checkout. That's JUICEBOX at checkout to save 40% at CozyEarth.com. If you're looking for community around type 1 diabetes, check out the Juicebox Podcast private Facebook group, Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes. I'm having an on-body vibe alert. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Eversense 365, the only 1-year wear CGM. That's one insertion and one CGM a year. One CGM, 1 year. Not every 10 or 14 days. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. The Juicebox Podcast is full of so many series that you want and need. After Dark, Ask Scott and Jenny, Algorithm Pumping, Bold Beginnings, Defining Diabetes, Defining Thyroid, the Diabetes Pro Tip series for Type 1, the Diabetes Variable series, Mental Wellness, Type 2 Diabetes Pro Tip, How We Eat. Oh my goodness, there's so much at juiceboxpodcast.com. Head up into that menu and pick around. And if you're in the private Facebook group, just go to the feature tab for lists upon lists of all of the series. Always free, always helpful.
My name's Mike. I live in San Diego. I've been type 1, over 45 years now. And yeah.
How old are you, Mike?
I just turned 55 today.
Oh, oh, really? Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
Thank you. So I can now eat off the Denny's 55 plus menu.
Things are really heading in your direction finally.
You got to take the positives in this world with all the negatives.
I didn't know our birthdays were so close to each other's.
I know. Happy late birthday. My replacement service dog trainer, my replacement service dog, the trainer was here working and we were pretty tied up. So I didn't get to wish you happy birthday. Happy belated birthday.
Thank you very much. And happy birthday to you. We are 5 years apart and 2 days. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So Mike, you were on a How We Eat episode for keto. 409?
496.
496. There you go. Some of the similar numbers. 496. And I would have to say months had gone by after that, after we recorded it maybe. And I got a really, I thought, passionate email from you saying that you needed to come back on the show and talk about complications and your life in general. So yeah. I think that's very brave, and I appreciate you wanting to do that.
Sure. I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to, explain to people. It's kind of emotional for me when I start talking about it. So, bear with me.
I brought tissues to this one. Do you not have tissues?
I have short sleeves and the whole bottom of my shirt.
I guess for people who didn't hear you on How We Eat, just give them a couple of minutes, about your diagnosis and how things were back then.
Sure. So back in the 70s, when I was diagnosed, there was no meters, no good insulins. There was, I need to back up just a hair there for a quick second. So I was misdiagnosed by a general practitioner for over a year with an ulcer, because I had the symptoms of the doubling over stomach cramps. I guess that's when my body was attacking the beta cells or the pancreas, from my understanding. So he diagnosed me with an ulcer, and he diagnosed my mom with being so mentally hard on me just as a kid in general in life that it stressed me out so much that caused me to have an ulcer, which was farthest from the truth. I had a great, loving mom, loving family. As the time progressed, I was obviously losing more and more weight. And they finally took me to the hospital because I was just skin and bones. They couldn't figure it out.
Yeah.
Wasn't a DKA at that point, but I was close. They said I probably had a few more months and I would have been in DKA at that point. And it was funny. Well, I don't know if it's funny, but we were walking down the hall in the emergency room, and the doctor that was walking the other way looked at me, pointed to me, and told my parents, that kid's a type 1 diabetic. And it turns out that's the doctor that came into the exam room and properly diagnosed me. So, and at that time, things were pretty primitive. Again, like I said, there was no meters, no good insulins. We had beef and pork and you would take the beef or pork insulin until you started getting resistant to it. Then you would switch over to the either or beef or pork until you're resistant to that, and you kind of swap back and forth. If you got resistant to both of them, you're pretty much screwed at that point. So, and I was probably 500 the whole time I was a kid, because at that point they viewed it, if you weren't falling over, you were doing pretty good.
Right.
And you did 1 shot a day. You'd mix the insulin, and you had exchange rates at that time. Example, breakfast, 2 starches, a dairy, a fat, and then lunch, kind of the same thing, 2 or 3 starches, 4 proteins. And that's how they kind of managed it. So I was on 1 shot a day for till I was a teenager, and I went to a type 1 backpacking camp at the doctors there. Finally switched me over to 2 shots a day. And again, no meters, no way to really monitor how much insulin you need. But I can remember at that point when they switched me to 2 shots a day, how much better I felt. So maybe I came down from 500 to 400. I don't know. We'll never know.
I wondered, do you know why somebody thought to introduce it? Was it just the new way to do it, and you were doing it the old way?
Yeah, I think there was doctors at the camp. They were younger doctors. And at the time, from my understanding now of, doctors and how they treated diabetics, they basically kept you from not dying. Mm-hmm. And they wouldn't adjust, but that was their goal, to keep you from dying immediately from a low, but not long-term from complications. There was no way to tell, but as a teenager, the doctors at that point saw it was pretty antiquated for 1 shot a day. So they broke it up. So at least you had some more regular to cover dinner, instead of just covering dinner with whatever basal might be left over from the inn, right. Which I don't know if they really know what the peak on that was, whether it was 12 hours, 6 hours, 24 hours. I don't know. I've looked back in that. I can't find any good solid documentation that kind of gives the duration of that, like Lente now, or a Trishibia that's 48 hours. I couldn't find any data on that, and at this point, it doesn't matter. That's over.
Yeah, it's gone. So, what part of the 70s were you diagnosed?
Mid 70s, right around 76, 77. I remember the Freedom Train coming through. Wow. And it was like the summer before I was misdiagnosed, and then went through that school year, and the summer after when I was properly diagnosed. And like I said, I've seen pictures from our vacations. We went on family vacation. We were fortunate enough to go for a few weeks every summer. And again, it was just skin and bones, man. My shirt was just literally hanging off my skeleton.
Right.
And it was pretty sad.
That's over 5 decades after someone figured out insulin. that was still the situation.
There was really no way to there was no home monitoring. I mean, I know hospitals at that time had glucometers, but they're the only ones that really had them. And the reason they had them was if somebody came in passed out, were you a drunk or were you a type 1 diabetic, passed out?
And they needed this thing to figure that out.
Yeah, they needed some way to quickly figure that out, so they weren't putting type 1 diabetics in the drunk tank and then them dying.
Right. Wow. So you live a long time with a really high blood sugar.
Correct.
And I'm going to kind of break your life up into segments, I think.
Sure.
So in the moment, do you know what's happening, or is it just your life and there's no way to feel it? Or like, did you know you felt bad when you were on one shot a day?
I didn't know at the time because I really had nothing to judge it with, because I was never in a lower range to feel like, for instance, 120 versus a 500, and your body kind of gets used to it. And then I also remember as a teenager in high school, originally I have nothing wrong with private schools, but it wasn't my, let's say, cup of tea. And I wanted to go back to the public school where all my friends were from growing up elementary school. So my mom agreed to let me go back to the public school, but I had to take up extracurricular activity. So I chose cross country and track.
Perfect.
Yeah. And I never had a low. I never passed out. So that validates all the doctors of today's that, yeah, you must have been 500 the whole time. Because we were running, 10, 15 miles a day. We got up to. And here's the wacky noodles part of this. My mom read in a runner's magazine that you should carbohydrate load the day before a race. Oh. So she'd make me, not knowing this was a problem at the time, again, loving mother, she'd make me a whole box of mac and cheese that I would eat for dinner the night before, a whole box of pasta. So I was carb loading without covering for insulin because there was no knowledge of covering it for insulin.
Right. On top of all that, how did you run? Like, I guess you really... So for people listening who are managing in today's world, the idea that you could be 500 and living for days and days and days, or 400 or whatever, like that high like that,
yeah,
is probably confusing to them.
It's inconceivable.
Right. But really, in that moment, and for those years, your body's in an advanced state of aging, basically.
Correct.
You're using up your life cycles faster than you should be.
Correct.
And your body had a way of making itself feel normal enough that you could function.
Correct. Yeah. The other thing, the doctor that diagnosed me when I was a kid, which I found out later in life, that he told my mom that exercise equated to insulin. And anywhere I wanted to go, like my friend's house that was several miles away, an arcade, when I asked her, hey, can you run me over here? Well, ever since my diagnosis, she conveniently could never take me anywhere. She made me ride my bike, which that probably at that time was one of the best things for me. So, which helped me in cross country and track. And I still hold the record for the 100 at Christian Junior High to this day. So I was in top shape. I was just riding everywhere. So go figure. We talk about that now with some of the therapists they see with, sports therapy and stuff. And it's just, I think that her conveniently, but making me go ride for that exercise as insulin thing
was
probably extended at that time a lot of things.
Yeah. Bought you more time because she was driving your blood sugar down a little bit with the exercise and with you with all the running and everything.
Yeah.
Which would take you right back to prior to insulin, when they started figuring out what was happening. They would just starve people and move them around. That's how they would. That's how they try to elongate your life. If you had type 1 before insulin, they, don't eat anything, and then just keep active. And you were really just doing those things to stay alive. And so you were getting some function from that.
Correct.
what happens next? You go away to college?
No, I went to automotive trade school at that time. So first part of my life, I was a ASC certified auto mechanic. And again, just, whatever insulin single dose they gave me on the day and at night, I was just taking and eating any and everything. And there was no thought process behind it because there was still no monitoring,
Right.
I think I believe there was a meter at that time, but it took like 2 or 5 minutes to read. And what do you do with the information?
Yeah. And
that point,
if I'm remembering correctly from our other conversation, is this the point in your life where you get fairly unhealthy in other ways?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you tell people about that?
Yeah. So moved to Florida, with a girlfriend and her family. We loved sailing and it was warm water there. So, we're drinking and, eating whatever, because there's really, I've never been told not to.
Right.
And there's been no great information to, hey, you need to do these things to take care of yourself. So the doctor I saw at that time, because I knew I needed insulin. Insulin was life. You could buy syringes over the counter. So I was basically seeing him for the prescription for insulin. And, I was really overweight. I'm 5'11". I was like 245-ish, 250 overweight. And he finally one day going in to get my prescription, said that you really need to do better in your life. And I'm like, okay, like, get a desk job or something.
Do better
I like
than
working
what?
on cars.
Yeah.
So he said, no, diabetes wise. He said, I'm going to send you to see this person who I'm still lifelong friends with today. See this person. And if I get back good information from this person that you will start taking care of yourself, I will keep prescribing you insulin. We'll check in the hospital. If I get bad information from this person, no doctor in South Florida will see you. I will ban you from seeing any doctor in South Florida through the medical profession, or however he worded it at that time. So I'm thinking, insulin life, and no insulin, not life.
I'll do what this next guy is going to get to tell me whatever he wants.
Yeah. So, so I went and saw the person. It was at diabetes treatment centers they had at the hospitals at that time. And she scared the bejeevers out of me. If you want to put any other explicit word in there, you could go ahead and do that and bleep it out. So I got checked in the hospital at that point. They checked you in for like 7 days to regulate you, quote unquote. I'm doing air quotes, as you can see, regulate you as best they can, and got my first meter. And I took it serious. I was on multiple injections at that time, MDI. Insulin pumps were considered experimental. So after that week in the hospital, I continued to strive. I, hung out at the diabetes treatment center, the support groups, got at that time in the community, which made me feel really good about things. Started eating healthier. And the next thing was I needed to lose weight. And he said, you got to start doing some exercise. And I was working for an Acura dealership at the time. And the parts manager raced amateur bicycles. And he invited me to come out and cycle with him, to try to help him lose weight. And so I bought my first bike that month, rode a little over 1,000 miles and lost like 45 pounds plus that first month. So,
jeez.
I'm an all or nothing guy. In case anybody that I don't just dabble in anything.
Well, let me ask you a couple of questions. So you basically are living in your. Well, tell me how old you were when you met this second doctor.
I was in my early 20s.
Okay, so early 20s is you're young. You're a mechanic. You're living, you're sailing, you're screwing around with your girlfriend and eating whatever you want and drinking. You said drinking. I'm assuming you meant beer and stuff like that. Yeah. So
Just beer.
Yeah, just beer.
At that point.
Was it a rapid weight gain for you? Or
No,
had
the weight
it been
gain
happening
was,
through high school?
Weight gain was when I was in high school running cross country and track, I was, just a rail. And I got in a really bad car crash. I was in the backseat of a little Honda Civic, I think it was. And we had these mountains out here. And one of the cool things to do, which is really not cool, is to go on the mountain, turn your lights out, and scare the crap out of everybody in the car, and try to anticipate the curve you made. So this girl was driving, and she wasn't a good driver, but I'm in the backseat. I should have said something, but I didn't, because I'm with my friend trying to protect her. We grew up as neighbor kids, and we went off the mountain, airborne into a tree, and luckily the tree branches, as we landed about mid-tree. I went back and looked at it afterwards, and it was probably, the tree was taller than not a two-story, but a one-story house. So, but between that, so we landed in that. The impact lifted me up, and of course, no seatbelts at the time. So I broke both my ankles, shattered my shoulder as the car fell down. It was pretty gentle fall through the limbs until we hit the ground. It was in front of somebody's house.
Do you think,
so we hobbled in there and help.
Mike, is it possible that Steven Spielberg has stolen a portion of your life story for Jurassic Park and you're owed money? Because
I didn't even think of that. But anyways, after I healed, I went out, did 6 miles with the, because at that point the guys team was running 10 to 15, and I was trying to get back into it. I did 6 mile loop, and I hurt so bad I never ran after that again. And it was from that progression through my early 20s that I started gaining the weight, because I was just,
right.
I could eat a whole extra large deep dish pizza and was setting myself. So when we'd go to pizzas, we'd get 3 or 4 pizzas with the family.
Jeez. Well, okay. So take me into that room in your 20s. What does that doctor who scares you, what do they say to you?
Well, basically the doctor or the diabetes treatment center?
The treatment center. I'm sorry.
Oh, so she, we'll cut to the quick. Her first statement was, "You got a girlfriend?" "Yeah." "You like having sex?" "Yeah." "Well, if you want to keep having sex, you better start taking care of yourself, because that's the first thing that's probably going to go." No, not probably, will go. That grabs a young man's attention really quick, like literally by the short hairs.
You're like, I did not recognize that erectile dysfunction is going to be what you started with today.
No, man, she just flat out, and it was just, I think I turned 50 shades of white.
Right.
Because it was just like, oh my God. Yeah, no, no, what?
Yeah.
No.
Well, let's fix this quickly.
Yeah, that was, when can we check me into the hospital? Well, we have to have the doctor's note first. Can we call him now?
Yeah, my ankles are fine. Can I go for a walk? So she hit you with that as a side effect of unregulated blood sugars.
Correct.
Okay.
And she said at that point, it had no age limit. It was just, it could happen to you tomorrow, or, the better care you take of yourself, let's just say it could never happen. But at your rate, it will.
In that moment, 5 seconds before that, did you think of yourself as a person with unregulated blood sugars?
No, not at all. Matter of fact, you could go through the drive-thrus there. I won't say the name of the place, but you could get, and I got the fried shrimp platter with 2 Coors Lights to go through the drive-thru window.
On your way to the diabetes treatment center?
Yeah. So I got fried shrimp, French fries, a couple of beers. I didn't drink them while I was driving, but I drank them in the parking lot.
And that wasn't a goodbye to health, because you didn't think that's what was happening. This is just a common way you would have eaten. Yeah.
Not on a work day, but yeah.
I have a question. I'm going to jump ahead for half a second, because I know you now.
Yeah.
We're not, I don't know you well, but I know you. And
yeah, we communicate.
Yeah, right. You don't seem like that person. Was it youth? Was it the high blood sugars?
That was just how I lived.
It's just how you lived. It's just how things occurred to you, and that's what you did.
Yeah, because, we take the sailboat out for the weekend, couple of 12 packs of beers, maybe after work, we take the sailboat out or the motorboat, and, beer was always involved. You go out for a pizza, have a couple beers. I will preface this. I never drank and drive drunk. A couple of 3 beers was about it. But when we be out on the water, we get pretty sloshed. But, sailboat only goes so fast.
So you got to find your excitement somewhere else. Okay. All right. So she hits you with ED. Anything else?
That was the opening and closing statement. That's all it needed.
She started. She's like, "There's other stuff." You're like, "No, I'm good. I'm going to do it." So they. We're good. Do you want to hear about the heart disease? Nope, don't care. I'm not going to make it that far.
Didn't know there was heart disease involved at that point. Learned that later.
So they check you in, and they get you. Basically, it's a blood sugar detox, I guess, for the lack of a better term. Did they teach you about food? What happens in that time?
So they didn't really teach you about foods. They were still using the exchange rate at that point. Mm-hmm. So a starch is a slice of bread. It's mashed potatoes that's about the size the palm of your hand, a dinner roll, and you kind of went on that. And so I diligently, again, as I say, I'm all or nothing if I know better. So I went into it with eyes wide open and really focused on doing the best I could. Had a meter, so I was test before breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So that's what the doctor told me to do. That's what I did.
Do you remember any of those early blood sugar tests?
Yeah, in the high 100s, low 200s was not uncommon, and was praised. You're doing great. Yeah. And then, like I said, I didn't do the 2-hour test. I wasn't told to. So I was told I was doing good. I was now in control. I do not remember my A1Cs at the time, but they're not what I've got now. They were probably, under 12, maybe 11. I can't remember, but right at that time, whatever the ADA recommendation was, I was considered compliant.
Okay. And so how long does this phase of your life with blood sugars last?
Well, so because I was riding, exercising, and I was no Lance Armstrong or, Tour de France qualifier, but I held my own. And there was a group there that was out of the Mike's Cyclery Bicycle store. It just happened to be, and they called themselves the Mike's group, and it wasn't for me. Those were the hardcore local guys, and they met early, like 5 a.m, to go train. And they would, you'd get a 40, 50, 60 mile hardcore workout before work. And on the MDI, I'd get up set my alarm, get up at 2, bolus or inject, go to sleep for an hour, wake up at 3, I would eat, and then wake up at 5. And depending on my blood sugar, I would either go work out or, I couldn't because it was kind of out of whack, being either too high or what I thought at that point wasn't high enough to go do the strenuous workout. And by default of doing the same thing 7 days a week, every morning, I was able to get my breakfast dialed in so I could do those workouts. And this is where I progressed to, I wanted to get an insulin pump because I was taking so many injections throughout the day, because I'd do the hard workout before work. I'd ride my bike to work. I'd go ride, an hour at lunch hard. I'd ride home. So I was doing more and more and more exercises and picking up more and more of these little group kind of heavy workouts. And the MDI was getting to be too hard. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to get on an insulin pump. Asking my doctor, and he said, no, there's too high risk for, DKA, infection, and hospitalization, and they're experimental. I don't have anybody on one. So it took me about 6 months begging and pleading him. And I found the only type 1 diabetic at that time who did the Ironman in Hawaii, that was on an insulin pump. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back of his, okay, I'll let you try this. And it worked out really good.
Yeah.
I still didn't have stellar, A1Cs that we have today, but in that time, that worked out really good because I didn't have the long acting floating around in there.
Right.
Just had the basal and then kind of make some adjustments. And I ate a lot of Fig Newtons at that time because they're 11 grams of carb each. I could figure out what that was going to be for the next 2 hours of, either strenuous or non-strenuous workout. Matter of fact, I had charts and graphs at that time of just about every food the grocery store sold, what the carbs were, how much insulin it needed. Again, the all or nothing guy.
Well, yeah, it's funny you say that, but I keep thinking nobody told you, and maybe nobody knew. But I mean, I think you would have done it if you would have known.
Oh yeah, had 100% had I known,
yeah,
I would have been doing it. But again, I get my prescription, see you, doc, see you in 3 months, and whatever. And until he finally just said, "This is insane. You're just killing yourself." Well,
so now you're riding your bike and you lost. I mean, it sounds like you lost a lot of weight in one swing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And now you're living like this, higher A1Cs than we would think of now as being okay, but it was way better than what was happening. It was a huge improvement, etc. In your mind, you're out of the woods, right?
Oh yeah, in my mind, I'm golden. I'm going to avoid any complications, any long-term effects, and really at that point, nobody really talked about it. It was, I don't want to say it was the unspoken, but if I look back, it was kind of the unspoken. Nobody talked about it unless you were. Anybody that had the amputation, you say, well, you're diabetic. My uncle lost his leg, and you hear that story from everybody. Oh, thanks.
Right, great.
But being type 1 at that time, you were considered able to control it. You were the lucky diabetic because if you wanted to take care of it, you could, which is further from the truth. But
so from your diagnosis to this time where you've got from your diagnosis from 1 shot a day to 2 shots a day. To the weight gain, to the intervention, I'll call it, to getting on a pump and having stability at 8. What do you think those A1Cs back then were on that first pump? 9, 8?
I don't think it was 8. It was probably 9, between 9 and 11, I would imagine.
Okay.
Because you go out to do a time trial, and you might jack yourself up to 300 before you go out to do the event. Same thing with a mountain bike race. You're not going to start a mountain bike race at that time at 150. You're going to crash.
Okay.
So I had a Camelback that I had. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to know how much time it was from your diagnosis to this time in your life.
Like today time or
no,
that
to
time?
then, to that time with that pump, those 11 A1Cs from your diagnosis.
Oh, it was pretty quick. So once, even with the MDI at that time, the intervention period, I pretty quickly came down to that. It was probably months once I started exercising and
that happened.
Getting into the local amateur bike racing, amateur mountain bike racing, and the weekend group rides.
Okay.
So I was being really physical. I was doing 300 plus a week easily.
And you're in your mid 20s by then, or no, still early?
I'm in my late early, starting on my mid.
Okay. And you're diagnosed again at how old?
It's like 8 or 9, or between 9 and 10.
Okay. So fair to say about 15 years of your life is spent at least over an 11 A1C and going this whole process that you just described.
Yes.
Right. Now, from that point I'm sorry, I feel like the bad guy in this story for some reason, but from that point until your first complication, how long is it, and what is that first one?
So my first noticeable complication, and I've been a type 1 diabetic test monkey for new drugs and apparatuses for 25, 30 years. And this has to be, I'm trying to think of numbers here. I'm not just spacing, but so this is before my trophy wife. Now, after I moved back to, so this is around there, right around 2000, maybe. One of the studies I was signed up for was people with or without neuropathy of known degree. There was a a pill that they were going to give you for a year or whatever it was to see if once they measured your neuropathy in your lower, like your ulnar between your foot and like your calf, they did a measurement, and whatever that was, there was a your in or out parameter, kind of go, no go. And they would measure that over the year to see what the improvement was. So they had an electrode on my calf, like it was, what do they call it? Acupuncture needle. That's how they had the probe in there on your nerve. And they would fire that nerve and they measured it somewhere in the bottom of your foot. And I'm not looking at what, because I'm laying on a table, on my belly, and this guy's doing this measurement, feet, straight out, knee bent up, and he's doing this and spend a little bit of time. And he's, he kept asking me, "Are you okay?" Yeah, man, I'm fine. And he's, "Okay, are you sure you're okay?" I said, "Yeah, why?" And he goes,
when you think of a CGM and all the good that it brings in your life, is the first thing you think about, I love that I have to change it all the time. I love the warm-up period every time I have to change it. I love that when I bump into a door frame, sometimes it gets ripped off. I love that the adhesive kind of gets mushy sometimes when I sweat and falls off. No, these are not the things that you love about a CGM. Today's episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by the Eversense 365, the only CGM that you only have to put on once a year, and the only CGM that won't give you any of those problems. The Eversense 365 is the only one-year CGM designed to minimize device frustration. It has exceptional accuracy for 1 year with almost no false alarms from compression lows while you're sleeping. You can manage your diabetes instead of your CGM with the Eversense 365. Learn more and get started today at eversensecgm.com/juicebox. 1 year, one CGM.
He kept asking me, "Are you okay?" I've got this thing cranked up and I cannot get a response. Like, well, what does that mean? Yeah. He goes, "You've got serious lower neuropathy." And I'm like, "That can't be true. I can feel heat, cold, fuzzy carpet." And he goes, "No." So my nurse practitioner at that time, who I saw as my doctor, quote unquote, she also did research with the UCSD VA, where a lot of the research was performed. And she kind of just got the result we're talking about. She goes, "Man, I'm sorry. I didn't know that things were that bad." I'm like, "What do you mean that bad?" And the levity of it didn't hit me because I'm thinking that's wrong. I can feel, again, hot, cold water, I can feel everything. So I dismissed it as, kind of whatever. But looking back on that now is, I guess that was kind of harder to take when I look back at it, but I blocked it. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
I guess I just blocked it out of my mind, thinking this can't be true. Right. So that was the first. On record, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Results of a test, and that was all because I was, going to do studies.
Mm-hmm. So that's about 25 years into your life with type 1, and literally over 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
Okay. Does that progress in a way that's measurable, or do you just notice one day that it's worse, or how does that go?
It's hard to say. again, I still dismissed it, thinking that they were wrong. But again, it was a machine they measured. So
yeah,
I don't know. I still did a bunch, dozens of more studies on different drugs and different things. But that was the first one that had a measurement that I couldn't do the study. And then I noticed there was, something was going down.
Well, okay. What's the next thing that happens?
Next noticeable, which I didn't know. And in the meantime, I've had, do you know what the Dupuytren contractures are?
No.
So Dupuytren contracture, a lot of people call it trigger finger, but it's not trigger finger. Trigger finger is you're using your finger and it locks.
Okay.
It's painful. And then it, at some point it straightens up. A Dupuytren contracture, it's really common in type 1 diabetics. They don't know why, other than they believe it's something to do with the synthetic insulin, but it's basically a growth of collagen weed that goes around your tendons, nerves, and starts pulling your fingers down and locked so that they won't extend past a certain point.
Okay.
And I've had several on my left hand. And my left pinky, the last one I did, I had done by a hand specialist who turned out to be a butcher. And as you can see, I don't have a pinky.
Right.
He did the repair, cut the nerve, didn't write it in hand therapy, and the nerve repair popped and my finger got stuck at an angle like that, and it would get caught in places.
Wow.
And for the record, for those of you who can't see me, it was bent over more than halfway toward my palm, but it would flex to my palm, but it wouldn't flex past. So as I'm working on a car or something, you squeeze it in somewhere and your finger can't pull out.
Oh my gosh.
So now you got to get a screwdriver or something in there, hack the crap out of your finger trying to get it bent down to your palm and pull out. So that's why they ended up amputating that one so they took 2/3 off. So I got the nub.
So you have 2/3 of your left hand pinky is gone.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Wow.
There it is.
Yeah, no, I know. I just want to make sure people understand.
Yeah. I believe that's the distal phalange, I think they call it. No, I don't know. But it's one of those phalanges I can only count to 4 1/3 on my left hand.
But if you hold up both of your fingers, you can get to 8.5.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I recently lost my other one. But one of the complications I felt next after the feet, the finger, is I started getting really bad frozen shoulder on my right side to start with. Mm-hmm. So you'd throw a Frisbee or something and it'd be like, just be that thing at different times.
Is there anything they can do for that?
When it gets so bad, they can inject steroids, but you know what steroids does to a type 1.
Yeah. So
they can go in there when it gets to a point you can't move it and clean it out. I went to the shoulder doctor and he said, also my right bicep, the neuropathy, whatever you want to call it, it crystallizes the muscles, tendons, and nerves. Mm-hmm. So when that happens and you move your arm out real quick, that rips, and that ripping of that crystallization is just painful. Wow. That's a problem. And I'm trying to think of the progression of the other complications. So I work with my hands. I'm no longer a auto mechanic, but I'm a piano and instrument repair technician. So I'm still working with my hands. Mm-hmm. And it was several years ago. As I'm working with my hands, my fingers would just lock up in these contorted positions. And at any given time, and I would drop the tool I'm working with. I'd ask my hand therapist, or not hand therapist, my hand doctor specialist, what's causing it? Do I have arthritis? And he says, no, you don't have arthritis. why is they locking up? He said, I have no idea why they're locking up. But that would get worse and worse and worse. And then recently diagnosed as severe neuropathy.
Yeah. When did the brain fog come?
Oh gosh. So the brain fog. So here's what most of my type 1 buddies my age, we call it diabetic dropout. You're talking and you forget where you were talking about or the word or whatever. And that was that was happened over the years, but that was also it's basically Alzheimer's.
You want to take a break?
No, but right. It's the crystallization of your fine blood cells in your brain, which they've recently basically it's basically Alzheimer's. There's nothing you could. Hang a second.
All right.
That's the one that really gets me. I think about that one. They I still haven't had the MRI yet because I don't want to know the results of how what the measurement of it is. You can't take Alzheimer's meds because the side effects are harder on you than what the benefit might be. But that's just years and years of, out of control blood sugars. But there was nothing we could do. We didn't know about it. They didn't know about it, 20, 30 years ago. This is something they're puppies and kittens.
Can I ask you why you wanted to do this?
Yeah. I hear it so often from people who were newly diagnosed in the past few years. If there was ever a time to be diagnosed, now is the time. Sorry, both my sleeves are all wet.
We should have went with a long sleeve shirt, but
it's too hot out. But yeah, so, and what really tied this all together is I used to say, it's a pretty good time to be diagnosed with diabetes. I volunteered at a lot of kids' ski camps that I can't do anymore because of my neuropathy, but just letting people know that it's a pretty good time. Now, back forward a little bit. As you know, I started listening to you when COVID hit, and I first off employed bump and nudge, and I got down to the low 6, high 5s, just with that regular diet. I was figuring out stuff, and then that's when I decided to go keto, not because of the Juicebox method, but it just seemed like something to do, easier to do. I love barbecue. And then when we did our first recording back in October, I was at, I believe it was 5'7". Since then, I've been rocking a solid 5'5".
Wow.
And then that's when it tied in to myself and why I wanted to do this. So the parents of kids nowadays, to give them some relief that by once you learn how to use insulin, and I will say until I listen to your podcast, your gift to the world, whatever you want to call it, I never really knew how to use insulin. If you really want to take it, because the doctors are, oh yeah, you're 7, you're 8, don't 8.5. It's just,
right.
That's still not healthy. That's long-term, no good. But by keeping good A1Cs and keeping in the low 5s, even at a low 6, my heart of hearts, my belief, and talking with my neurologists, you're going to avoid all that. You're not going to have this stuff happening to you. When you think about your sandblaster, vision, that just hits home, and feeling the sugar crystals. It's like, duh. But I really wanted to give some comfort to these new parents. And I see it all the time on the Facebook group, diagnosed, 4 months ago, A1C was 5.7, it's like, you can get it. You can grasp it. You can live a life without complications. And there's no doctor in the world that'll tell you that. And that's what's bullshit.
Right.
Sorry, that just...
No, you're fine. Please. You're kidding me. You can say whatever you want.
But it took a non-diabetic and a non-doctor to figure this out and share this with the world. You can do this without the complications. If you do the ADA's recommendations 7 to 8s, you're going to have something happen to you, man.
Yeah.
And as of now, I'm 55 years old. I'm having to go out on disability because I can't work. Do my shoulders, my hands. So I had to have my right pinky amputated a few months back. They had fixed that Dupuytren several times, and within a year, it kept coming back. Mm-hmm. The blood supply on the outer finger was compromised, so there was just no way to do another surgery.
Right.
It wouldn't live. So now I'm double nubbed. But in that hand therapy, so you do a grip test, and I've always been in the 95s, and that's an average male between 90, 95, 100. Mm-hmm. And this last grip test I did, which proves my point, I can't even open a Gatorade bottle. It was 20.
Wow. How quickly did that drop off happen?
It happened over the last couple of years. It started getting really bad, but it was just a progression from all the years gone by. Mm-hmm. They did a upper and lower neuropathy test where they do the same thing with the acupuncture needle, and they start at your hip, and they go down, and it's on this little speaker. I don't know the name of the procedure, but it's as they're working their way down, when the nerves are firing, you hear this noise on the speaker. And the closer they got to my knee, the quieter it got. Once they got below my knee, it was dead silent.
Right.
We used to walk miles and miles and hike. I can do about 2 miles maybe on a walk. I walk with a walking stick now, and that's on hard pavement. We don't hike anymore. I just can't.
Yeah.
It hurts too much.
Is the issues you're having relegated to your extremities, or have you willfully not been looking internally at yourself, or what is the rest of it like?
You mean physically or mentally?
I was going to get to mentally in a second. I meant physically first.
Yeah, physically. It's just the neuropathy is so bad at this point. I can step on it's like the Princess and the Pea. I step on a little pebble with bare feet, man, it's excruciating.
Wow. I guess I feel compelled to ask you about like how do you manage seeing, because what's really happening is you're seeing aging happen at an accelerated rate.
Yeah.
Right?
I thought the wheels wouldn't fall off till my late 60s, early 70s. That happened a whole lot quicker. I had jet fuel in me, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it even really, I hate to talk about it like this, but it must be frustrating for you because now looking back and understanding where your blood sugars are, your body really was resilient, honestly, to get you this far. And yeah. I mean, am I wrong? But it can't, I hate asking this, but
ask anything. I'm an open book.
Do you
I'm here to tell all, be all, whatever. People need to hear this. They need to, it was hushed and shushed and everything was behind, just don't talk about that.
Right.
So people need to hear the truth and why it is so crucial to live the way you have Arden living and all these other people that are in their fives. Yeah, you're going to get to 160, but you're not hanging out there for 4 or 5 hours. It's not the excursion. It's okay to be 300 for 7 hours. No, it's not.
Do you play What If ever? Do you ever think about what if you learned it sooner?
100. Yeah. Every 24 hours a day.
You can't avoid it, I imagine, right?
You can't. Well, it was really bad there, man. I was so spun out, especially after I lost my right finger, that, oh my God, what if, what am I going to do? And, what am I going to do? My wife, what are you going to do when I die? And what if I die? It's like,
right.
I was just such a bad mental place. And, what's going to happen tomorrow? And God, if this doctor would have told me 20 years. And yeah, I have sought mental help.
Yeah. I mean, you have to, right? Do you see a therapist?
Yeah. Yeah. So I knew after my right amputation, I mean, I spun out, man. I spun out because it threw me off the cliff, and I got so spun out of, what next?
Right.
If I'm this way now, what's tomorrow? What's next year going to bring?
Yeah.
And I just, it was so bad. My trophy wife said, if you keep this up, I'm not living this life. That's not what I signed up for. I was always known as it's all good, man. Rule number 1, rule number 2, see rule number 1. And I was in a dark, really dark valley that the moon wasn't even shining in.
So your wife didn't have any trouble with your health issues. She had trouble with how you were facing them.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Correct. Yeah. And even when you're dating, so I wasn't quite 40 yet when we started dating. And, you're diabetic and you think you're 40, who's going to want you? And so I met her. We kind of, from the first date we went on, we haven't been separated other than a business trip or something like that. We've never really fought until, I don't want to say we fought recently. Really recently is when she said, I can't, this is not what I signed up for. And this is the funny thing. She has a really close relative who is a nurse, who is type 1, who had 911 called on her dozens of times. And knowing that, and she got with me as a diabetic, I'm thinking, what? But, we fell in love, and she's like, it doesn't matter. Things happen, things are going to happen. And thank God I haven't had to have 911 called on me. And then after 5 or 6 years later, she asked me why. And I, why? I test my blood sugars, but I was always higher than lower because I developed really bad hypoglycemic unawareness, and I was paranoid of going low.
Right. Well, Mike, you're shining a light on something that I contend constantly. I don't say it as out loud as much as maybe I think it, but everyone who's come into this life, in the past handful of years and seeing technology like it exists now, I don't think that a vast majority of them will see the issues that you're having. And no. I wonder if they don't want to pretend like they don't exist so they don't have to think about it. And that I understand. But my responsibility becomes such that as the podcast grew and it started reaching more and more people, I thought, I'm not just talking to, moms with good insurance or, kids who grew up well and have Dexcoms anymore. I realize now that I realized it then, but as it grew, I'm reaching more people. And my contention is that there are way more people like you living in the world right now with type 1 diabetes than there are the average parent of a child who's got good insurance and found a podcast. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't want to be a boutique show. And I mean, I was really grateful that you reached out and wanted to talk about all this. And I have to admit, when you asked, I didn't know how you were going to do it. I have to admit that personally for me, it's listen, I don't have any of your health issues, you know, and when this is over, I don't have to do whatever you have to do today, but your name being Mike is hard for me. That's the weirdest thing, but at the same time, Mike, I feel like I missed my friend Mike, and I feel like I missed you too. You know what I mean? So it's a weird thing. It's obviously not. It's not. All of your health is not my responsibility, but it's a real. It churns up stuff for me, because when I start thinking about my friend Mike, I don't believe that by the time Arden was diagnosed and and by the time I figured this stuff out, it was likely too late for him to begin with. But it would have been cool to see him feel hopeful once, or to hear him talk about his 5.5A1C or something like that. And it's just, it's tough for me to hear you describing what's happening to you, because I feel like I can see your future already. And I think you feel like you can see it too.
I do. And I know what you're talking about. I've heard you talk about Mike, and, it who knows, but I truly believe in my heart of hearts now that I'm not going to get better per se, but hopefully I won't get worse.
Right.
And I will say this. I've always worn glasses to drive at night since I was 18. And since I've been doing, your technique strategies, not medical advice, I know, but employing how to use insulin and how to bump and nudge and pre-bolus and all those, I no longer wear glasses.
Oh, that's cool. I wish I could do something to get myself to stop wearing glasses. I'll tell you what, if anybody wants to start a podcast that gets me away from these reading glasses, I'd be really, really grateful.
Well, and I talked to my doctor about that, and the eye doctor, and it's because my eyes aren't, shrinking, swelling from
constantly.
the blood sugars. My mom wears pretty heavy glasses. My dad, my granddad, nobody else did. So for what that's worth.
Well, thank you. I that's a weird I'm sorry that I turned this into you making me feel better, but I appreciate knowing that. I was just trying to give context, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I know we're in a weird setup right now where I don't have a camera on and you do, but there are times I've had to look away from you, because I'm like, God, I need to be able to keep this moving and put a podcast together. We can't both start crying, because I don't think anybody would listen to it.
Well, it's, and the other reason why I was happy to do it, and I knew I was going to break down, but it's sad. It's you look back and you think, what I used to do and where I'm at now. But you know what? I honestly believe in my heart of hearts how much worse it would have gotten so much faster, the other issues, had I not found the podcast and been able to employ those tools to hopefully stop the future, and carry on where I'm at. And I believe that.
I'm glad.
I do. And and that was,
well,
that was part of it. Well, go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry.
No.
Go ahead. Okay.
It's all you.
No, I it's part of what I was trying to say, and what I've been trying to say about why this all needs to be kind of bulletproof and easy to understand. Because in my mind, what if the podcast finds you, but it's too convoluted or too difficult, and then you're like, and then you walk away from it. Like, it needs to be like, there's a person online last night who put up some graphs, and people were, pretty much, it's interesting to watch people from the podcast talk because they're like, there's two factions. One of them's right. Okay. This person's this person's basals is either not strong enough or they're bad at bolusing for their meals, right? It's one of these two things.
I saw that post.
Right. But the point is that it is definitely going to be one of those two things. But you're talking to a parent of a child. It's a fairly new diagnosis. They don't know what they're talking about yet. They're trying to figure it out. And I think that if I can give myself credit for anything, I can give myself credit for coming up with the idea, the very simple idea that you first make sure your basal's right, then you learn to pre-bolus, then you learn the glycemic load and index of your different foods, and stay flexible. And it's a 4-step idea that is doable. And no matter whether you're a person whose basal's too weak or you don't know how to bolus your food, if you go through those 4 steps, you're going to come out on the other side with an answer that's valuable for yourself. And while these people were talking to this person, I realized that the one difference between all of those people who all had rock solid advice and me was that I have a concept of what it's like to talk to a person without having all of their information, without really understanding and knowing that if you go back to get your basal right, make sure you pre-bolus, et cetera, that no matter what problem perspective you're coming from with using your insulin, that will get you to the answer. Like maybe this woman's basal's right for her kid. It could be, and maybe it's not that far off, but understanding that you can't just look and tell somebody something, because if somebody were to swoop in that moment on that person in that post and say, hey, your boluses are way off, which they probably are, but they don't address the basal first, then these people are going to be making these aggressive boluses forever, and they're going to have these lingering highs. And so I came in and I said, look, your bolus looks weak to me. People are like, no, look how stable our blood sugars are. These blood sugars are, it's just high because they're missing on the meals. I'm like, well, that could be it. But I know enough to say, well, yeah, maybe. Where everyone else is like, no, this is it. But they only think that's it because it's what happened to them. Yeah. And so understanding how to deliver this information in a way where everybody ends up at the same place if they kind of go through the steps, that's the part that's super important, because you miss people. You don't catch them all if you don't have something that everybody can work out. And I don't know. I just think that it means a lot to me that you found the podcast, it struck you, and it worked.
Yeah. And part of it, why it worked, I understood what you were saying, but you got to remember, I've never changed my own basal rates or adjusted those.
Yeah.
I've obviously fluctuated my boluses from what I'm eating, and it was always never enough. And then the 2 or 3 hours later, you're covering for 250, 275, 300. And that was just the way of life. So when I first started doing this, I needed somebody there in my corner to agree with what I was seeing and saying and adjusting. So I hired Jenny from Integrated Diabetes as my coach, my person in my corner, you're absolutely right. That's the right thing to do.
Right.
And by having that person as my crutch, I got it dialed in, we got it dialed in, because she was there with me too, but it validated everything that I understood to make those adjustments. I could have done it on my own, but I was terrified because I'd never made my adjustments. I go see my doctor twice a year, and she'd have my PDM, and here you go. Okay.
Well, we should make sure people definitely understand what you're saying. So you listen to the podcast, you're like, oh, that makes sense. Now, how do I pull the trigger on this? Then that's a really difficult thing to do, whether you're a person who's been living with diabetes for decades or a person who's only had it for a few weeks. Like the idea that you could move that number, turn that dial, like flip that switch it freezes people. And I'm telling you, give me one more second. The only reason I had the nerve to do it was because in the back of my dark mind, I was imagining things that have happened to you happening to my daughter. And I thought, we got to do something. Like, we can't just look at it, you know, but a lot of people get stuck looking at it.
Well, you got to remember that I have 20 some years of a habit in me of never making an adjustment to now make this adjustment versus somebody that's a year or two in it, 6 months in it, you know,
They can get over it a little quicker. Yeah.
Because you don't have that. Don't touch 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 that.
Yeah.
Just looming over you. You know, and I'm not saying we're, you know, sitting in a great place, but, you know, I could afford to hire as, you know, that help. And I know she's a big help to the show. And I knew from listening to her and you that was going to be what I needed, that help. And anybody that needs it, I mean, it's such a great ability to have that resource. I mean, you're only one man. You've only got so much time in the data. I know you'll help people and you do all the time. But I didn't need to bog you down at that point. I could afford to. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, not only that, but Jenny has something that I don't know how much it comes through when she's talking on the podcast, but I know Jenny more personally, and the anger, I think that might be the right word, that came out of you earlier when you talked about doctors not helping. Like, Jenny has that. Like, she has that inside. She does a good job of masking it, and it might not come out a lot, but she's driven by the desire, in my opinion, to thwart bad information.
100%.
Yeah.
I 100% see that. And after working with her, listening to you, and 100%. And she does a really good job putting the makeup over it.
Right. And she really cares about people too, which as soon as I met her and we started to get to know each other, I just thought, like, you know, I joke on you'll hear me joke on the podcast. I'll say I wanted to have Jenny back on because she agreed with me, but that's just me trying to be funny. I don't know if it works or not, but it does. I like when people agree with me, but that's for a different reason. But what I liked about Jenny was her desire, like I just spoke about.
Yep.
I like her knowledge. I like the practicality of how she thinks about it. And I think the first time I said to her, I don't believe that your diabetes may vary. I believe that everybody's diabetes at its core works the same way. And if you had your settings right, knew how to use insulin, it would work out mostly the
100%.
same for everybody. And she's like, 100%. I agree with you. And when she said that, I was like, yeah, okay, fine, finally. And she validates me. I don't know that she ever has thought about it. And I've definitely never said it to her, but her being on the show helps me reach more people because there's a validation that she agrees.
Yeah.
And when she doesn't agree, she just says so. And when I don't understand, I just say, oh, I don't understand that. You know, like you got to have it's crazy. I'm going to say this because people will laugh, but you have to have no ego about it. And then once you know you're right, you have to steadfastly defend the fact that you're right. and because other people will come in and say, no, I think it's the basal. I think it's this. So, you know, this story online that I told earlier, it's not over yet. It's still happening right now. And this person came back and showed a basal rate overnight that held this kid's blood sugar super steady. Like, it was great. And everybody's like, oh, see, and I think she moved the basal from 0.5 to 0.55 or something like that. And everybody's like, yeah, the basal's great. And I still was like, well, what's the number?
Yeah.
And the number was like 140, 130, 140. I'm like, okay, so the basal's great. It could still take a little more. Like, you could still put a little more, maybe 0.6 is the answer. Like, I don't know. I'm not there. But if that basal was right overnight, your blood sugar would be lower. And maybe you're not comfortable there. Maybe she loves 140 and then God bless. Like, right. But if not, I mean, Arden's blood sugar last night was like 85 all night.
Yeah.
So you can say that's not a big of a deal. That's 50 points. 50
It's
points
huge.
every minute you're alive. That's 50 points less blood sugar, like coursing through your blood.
That
I think that's a big
all
deal.
night it's that sandblaster is just trickling.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And I'm not saying, like, listen, if your kid's blood sugar is 140 for a week while you're figuring it out, or honestly, for 3 months while you're figuring it out.
Oh, absolutely.
You're going to be okay. Like, right. But what Mike's telling you is it can't be 10 years. It can't be 11 years. It can't be 20 years. It's not going to be okay.
No. And it's going to happen. You're going to have sick days, sick weeks, 6 months, or sick months. You know, that little time period is not going to do, long-term damage. I believe that in my heart of hearts, because the body does repair damaged cells, but there's a point where it can't repair it anymore.
Right.
And that's where I'm at.
You're hoping to hang just to stay stable where you're at.
Yeah.
And you've given yourself the best chance possible, honestly.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. You're doing an amazing job. Look, man, for people who don't understand what we're talking about still, I mean, if you've listened to Mike and you still don't understand, my friend Mike, who was diagnosed in the mid to late 80s, passed a couple of years ago. And I would say that his care mimics yours, but he never really, until the very last couple of years of his life, made it to modern insulin. And he was discussing what to eat for dinner when he stood up and ceased to exist. And that he did not know that was coming.
You don't. And I've heard from my doctor. It was a couple years ago. We were making some adjustments or whatever, and it might have. It was several years ago, but she goes, yeah, right now everybody's dropping dead of heart attacks. I'm like what, 60s, 70s? She goes, no, 40s and 50s. All these long-term type ones that were just, doing their habit, doing their thing. So and I want to preface for everybody that's listening, by doing right now, you're going to avoid that later.
Yeah, it is very likely not going to be the outcome for most people 45 years from now.
And I want to stress to these teenagers out there that you think you're invincible. You're not. If you're in college and you go to the mess hall and you come out of that with a 300 for 4, 5, 6 hours and think it's funny, it's not. Yeah. You're gonna more than likely have problems. And I know the teenage years are tough. I know they're tough. I know the early 20s are tough. You think you're that warrior, brave, you're invincible. You can be. Take care of yourself. If I can't get anything across, you got to do that in those years. Because I know when mom and dad's taking care of you, but when you go off to teenage and you want to not be on insulin for a while because you're tired of being a diabetic, trust me, I know what it's like. Been there, done that, got the shirt, hat, sticker, but you just can't do that. Yeah. And if I can get any message across, you can't do that. Do what's right. You're gonna be fine.
Anecdotally, I've spoken to enough people now where I have to agree with what you're saying, because, you're diagnosed when you're younger. And if you're lucky, you have parents who are on top of it, right? If you're not lucky, I feel like I've talked to almost every version of a person who's out there, right? And by the way, every time I say that, someone sends me an email and I was like, I bet you haven't heard this story before. And I'm like, ooh, I haven't. Say you're diagnosed when you're young and you get me and I'm your dad. And so you're okay. And then you get to college and you let it go. And a night turns into, and this isn't me making it up. These are the stories people tell on the podcast. A night turns into a week turns into a year turns into grad school. The next thing you know, you're 27 years old and some girl or guy is telling you, listen, I want to have kids one day. Are you sure you can do that? And then you go, oh, no. Geez, you're right. And then you whip it back into shape. And these are the stories people tell. But in that time, you lose 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. I don't know what your blood sugars were during there. You don't know either. Yep. And as much as it sucks, you don't know what's going to happen. And what's going to happen from that isn't going to happen until you're in your 40s, maybe, and if something doesn't luckily snap you back into it, which is what I hear from most people, it's usually not like a come to Jesus moment, like you just realized, oh, I should take better care of myself. It ends up being for other people. I hear a lot of women say, I wanted to get pregnant, so I got my blood sugar together. Or I got pregnant, I didn't realize I was going to get pregnant, and I had to pull my blood sugar together. Or I met a guy, and I realized I wanted to have a life. Or I met a woman, and I realized I wanted to have a life. Or vice versa, or whatever, whoever meets whoever. The point is, it seems to be, the trigger seems to be when you suddenly care about somebody else, you realize how much you weren't concerned about yourself.
Yeah.
And then suddenly that love or that connection makes you feel like you want to do better for yourself, almost for other people.
Yeah.
If 50 people haven't said that to me in the last 3 years, I'm lying. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's been that many.
But circle back to the pregnancy thing. When a diabetic wants to get pregnant, the doctors make them get their A1Cs below 6. And then once they had the baby, they go back to wherever they were.
Yeah,
like, why did you do that? Oh, it's just so exhausting. But I got to honestly tell you, I've recently taken on a new primary doctor because of my insurance, who is a type 1. And when they look at your A1C 5.5, that's too low. Why is it too low? Well, I told him I'm doing the Juicebox. Well, that's too stressful. Why is it stressful? Well, aren't you being stressed? I'm like, honestly, Scott, I think so much less about diabetes every day than I did before I started doing the method, because you'd eat lunch 2 hours, 3 hours later, 275, gosh, son of a. So now you're fighting that, trying to get that down to what you know should be a good number.
Yeah.
But my high alarm is at 120. And I told the doctor that, and he goes, you need to raise that. I'm like, why? Because it's too stressful. I go, why is it stressful? I'm pre-bolusing. Look at my graph. If I'm off a little bit, because, stress, happiness, sadness, a car pulled out in front of you, adrenaline, all those things happen every day in life. So that same turkey sandwich is going to be a little different day to day because of those factors. If I hit 120 and Dexcom, if you're listening, I love you, but please put a delta in there. So I got to go to SugarMate at 120, look at the delta. If it's +4, I'll give a couple of tenths a unit.
Mm-hmm.
If it's 120 +0, I'll watch it. And it usually goes right back down.
Jake's coming on next week from Dexcom, and he's going to
please beg him to put a delta.
I think he's going to tell me what the new apps look like. So I'm hoping that that's something. If not, I'll have to bring it up again. But
please do.
Yeah,
Number
I would
one,
imagine
delta.
They have to realize. And for anybody listening who doesn't understand, Mike's talking about rate of change. Like, he wants to know if his blood sugar's like not just an arrow like diagonal up. He really wants to know it changed 4 points in the last time since the last reading or something like that. It's really helpful information.
I look at that religion. It could be 120 -3. I'm definitely not going to do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But even if the Dexcom says it's a straight arrow, it's a good reference.
Yeah.
But I want to see that delta to know, do I need to be aggressive?
Right.
Like, instead of 0.2, 0.4 of a unit?
Yeah. No, I completely agree. It's incredibly important. If I was making an app, it would have it on there for sure.
Yeah, don't go high, you won't go low.
Maybe there'll be a Juicebox Podcast app one day. You can just you imagine. Jeez. I start getting into the app game. You're like, Scott's branching out.
I'd use it.
Well, I mean, I do want to ask if there's anything else you want to talk about before we start to wrap up. I don't want to leave you without having said the things you wanted to say, but.
Well, I said pretty much everything I wanted to say. If anybody wants to talk, I'm open. I'm in the Facebook group. I'm an open book. I don't hide anything from anybody. I talk about. See a therapist. I'm not mentally, people think you're seeing a therapist. You're mentally saying, no, I needed help to try to figure this out.
Yeah.
I didn't have the tools, so it's not shameful. And I talk about that to anybody because and I've had a couple of my friends say, hey, I really appreciate you talking about that. You know what? I need to see somebody because of this, that, the other.
Yeah.
So if I talk about it and they see that, well, what normal is normal, they can equate to that. So I'm a big advocate of that. Re-education to keep up with the times, the new technologies. I heard you talk about, why you don't write a book, why you don't write a quick notes, because things are fluid, things change. The technology changes. You need to re-educate yourself with what's new. Don't rely on your doctor. Do your research, look at these drug companies, go online on forum, on the Facebook group, and what's new, what's the newest and latest and greatest. I got a buddy in Arizona who I've recently met. I'm not going to say his name just for his privacy, but because I don't know if he'd want me to talk about him, but he's on regular and NPH. MDI. It's like, there's way better insulins. Really? I mean, he just didn't know because he didn't know who to talk to, reach out. He and I connected through another friend. We text every day. And he's doing better. I'm so proud of him. So you, Tucson chef, if you hear me saying this, man, my heart goes out to you. I'm so proud of how hard you're working on this and you're getting, sorry, man. I didn't think I was going to break down for that one. It just fills my heart with joy that he's getting the help he needs and he's finding these tools, which it's so sad because so many people are just diagnosed from the doctor that graduated in 1986, and that's a technology they know. Get a new doctor. Ask what's the latest from your new doctor. Don't take their word that this old insulin is great. Just go to Walmart and do that $25 vial insulin. Re-educate. I can't hammer that enough. And after finding the podcast, as I said, I didn't know how insulin worked. Nobody ever taught me. I never asked anybody because my doctor's got it. So why would you ask? And without the re-education and these better insulins we have, I can't push that enough. And
you don't want to be the lobster in the pot, man, where you're just like, this is all right. It's fine. Everything's good. This feels nice, actually. Yeah.
Nice.
I like not worrying about it. And then, it just, I mean, the way I usually say it on the podcast, right, is you don't want to look back one day and see that you're doing something the way people used to do it.
No. Yeah. And part of my therapy, my therapist, I just want to put this out there. I was so focused on yesterday and what happened 20 years ago and so worried about what's going to happen in 10 years. The best thing that broke through to me, and I think anybody can relate to this, is you got to be in the now. You got to be in the present. Throw away yesterday. Focus on today and have some concern about tomorrow. But tomorrow, that's when you be the present, not president. Mm-hmm. And to help you set yourself up, and here's the easiest tool that anybody can use. Wake up in the morning, get your coffee, and focus just on 3 things you're grateful for that day. And what I do, for instance, I teach barbecue and I got a barbecue store I work with. I volunteer there. I work for product, which I was unaware of this. But when my first dog, I had to retire because had to have his kidney removed. And she knew I didn't have the dog there to look out for me. She looked out for me. We were at one barbecue competition one time and I was overheating. So I slept in the motor went in the motorhome. I took a shower and I came out and she says, "Where'd you go?" I go, "What do you mean?" She goes, "You need to tell me if you're going to be out of sight. I got you. I'm watching you." So one of my days of being grateful, I thought about that. So I physically called that person. This is something I do. And I explained to her about my 3 things I'm grateful for that day. And if it's a particular person, a friend, I want them to know that I'm thinking about them that day and focus on 3 things. So since I've been doing that, and that buddy of mine in Tucson, he and I will text our 3 for the day just to kind of, see how we're doing and checking in. And there's several days that I've been practicing this. What am I grateful today? I'm in the present. There's some days I can't think of 3. I just feel such gratitude that it's just, I can't focus on 3. And that has helped me huge. And that I got directly from my therapist as an easy tool to work on. It is so effective. Be in now. Don't worry about 20 years from now, because the asteroid could hit tomorrow and we could all be gone.
Right. Yeah. Worry is a waste of imagination. That's for sure.
It is. Really but I got so spun up in that. I couldn't pull myself out.
Yeah. No, I understand. It happens to people. I don't generally worry a lot, but 2 days ago I woke up and I was literally worried about the thing I went to sleep worried about. And it's just like, it felt like it just started over again. I have to say that, being positive for other people too, it is really valuable. Like not just seeing like I talked about when I was talking to the doctor the other day, which I heard you reference earlier. And, I think if you're having success and you want to show your work, that's really great because someone is going to see it and feel hopeful about it. I think it's really important to remember that as we share online, the people you're intersecting with, who you can physically see commenting or liking, there are a very small portion of the people who are seeing it.
Yeah.
And as listen, if you're in a room with 4 people and you're talking, you're impacting 4 people. But I can tell you from my personal experience, I don't even at this point know how many people I'm talking to. I just have to imagine that they're there. And I've now heard from so many different people in so many different walks of life. I understand that they're there. I know they're there, whether I can see them or not. And being positive, not falsely, but in a tangible way, is very valuable for people. And I'm glad to see that I'm not hearing from so many people anymore that you don't show people when you're doing well because it makes them feel badly. I think that they'd much rather know that better exists and even get the idea that reaching for it might be valuable rather than just to make them feel like this is horrible and this is what it's always going to be. And look, everybody else agrees with me. So I'm just going to sit here in this pot and boil, that's all. I don't know why you made me think of a lobster today. But,
that's a great analogy. It's like putting the frog in cold water and turning it on, and he doesn't feel the difference till he
doesn't know.
Boils.
He's just like, it's happening, but I don't know it. Yeah, you got to try. The point really is that you have a finite amount of time, and even if it all goes perfectly, it's not enough time. So when things start, creeping up, and I think everyone's going to have roadblocks. I think a lot of them are going to be health, even if you don't have type 1. And, sometimes you only get stretches of time where you don't have to think about something. But if you don't pay attention to what you're doing and try to address it, those stretches are going to get shorter and shorter and shorter, and they're going to disappear one day.
Yeah. I think when you reference roadblock and you look at some of these like military leaders or these lieutenants and stuff and the way they look at things and there's a roadblock. What's the solution? Don't focus on the roadblock. You sit there and keep looking at the roadblock. That's all you're going to stare at.
Yeah. You get caught.
What's the solution? Whatever it is, whether it's diabetes, whether it's whatever it is, but that's a real valuable message I've got out of, some of these discussions and talks. It's like, don't just, and you get these negative Nellies that keep focusing. Oh my God, did you see what happened? Blah, blah, blah. That's like being in yesterday. Why didn't somebody tell me to do better 20 years from now? But that's gone.
Right.
What's the solution now?
Yeah. You got today and forward, and that's it. So
yeah.
Right. Mike, I really appreciate this. I can't thank you enough. I imagined that it wasn't going to be easy for you, and I appreciate what it must have taken to tell everybody all this stuff.
I knew it was going to be hard. Like I said, I'm reachable. I'm not. I don't know what I can do for anybody, but if somebody's in a dark place or having the same issues or worried about it, I don't know what I can do for anybody. I'm not Superman. I'm just a normal guy, but I understand sometimes you need to be able to associate that or talk with that, or you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying?
Find somebody who's in a similar situation as you and see if they know how to get out of the hole.
Yeah.
I have to tell you that I thought early on when you were describing, I was so tickled. I knew how serious everything was going to be today, so I didn't make this joke at the time, but it stuck with me through an hour and a half. The image of you walking through a hospital just on death's door as a child, and this doctor kind of like sashaying past you and being like, that kid has type 1 diabetes. I pictured John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever. I don't all I could think of was like swinging his hips with like his like fancy white suit, and he was just like, hey kid, what's up? A little
hand over.
Yeah, he just kind of like made like finger guns at you and was like, type 1 diabetes. And how proud he must have been of himself later. Like, there was like a moment where he was like, I knew that kid had diabetes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Dr.
I didn't think about that, but when you said that, I just had that poster image of the movie poster.
It might show my age, but you said that, and that's exactly. I had a guy strutting down a hallway in my head, And he was like, that kid's got the rickets. That kid's got type 1. I can just tell.
Can I say one other thing from a reference from
Please.
The podcast with the doctor when you were asking her, what's the answer? And she said 42. And you said, no, we're not going there. That was a reference from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe.
Oh, no kidding. I don't know that one.
You got to watch that movie.
Okay. She got to pass me.
Because as soon as she said that, I was like, oh, that was what a timely reference.
I wish I would have known that. You see, my level of understanding is just 37 from Clerks, which is not appropriate for here. So, but does turn out to be, like I said to her, when you ask people for a random number between 1 and 100, more frequently than not, people will say 37 for some reason.
Yeah.
So anyway, all right, Mike, I really appreciate you doing this. I'm going to think about this a lot. And I hope everybody else does too.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I'm like I said, I'm happy to spread the story that for people now, do your due diligence. It's not doom and gloom. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, when this goes up, I will put a post on the private Facebook group that announces this episode, and I will tag you in it so people can find you.
Sure. All right. And you got to do the John Travolta, the Saturday Night Live movie poster as the picture.
Oh, for the episode? I have to do that. Yeah. All right. Damn it. I will. All right, man. Thanks so much. Hold on one second.
God, thank you.
Yep.
I really appreciate you and all you're doing.
Nah.
And thank you, man.
Nah, it really is my pleasure. I mean, stuff like this makes this, not that it's hard to do to begin with, but if it was, this makes it much easier. You said something earlier that, I don't think I'll ever forget. And I know I've said it a number of times, but when somebody who has type 1 references that I don't have it, but in a positive way, like I can't believe somebody who doesn't have type 1 was able to talk to me about this. I mean, I'm very touched by that. It's the only real word I have. It means a lot to me that I don't come off as false to you.
No.
So thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.
I want to thank the Eversense 365 CGM and remind you that you may be eligible to experience the Eversense 365 CGM system for as low as $199 for a full year. You can visit eversensecgm.com/juicebox to find out more details and learn about the eligibility. If you're living with type 1 diabetes, the After Dark collection from the Juicebox Podcast is the only place to hear the stories that no one else talks about. From drugs to depression, self-harm, trauma, addiction, and so much more. Go to juiceboxpodcast.com, up in the menu, and click on After Dark. There you'll see a full list of all of the After Dark episodes. When or if you need something that is represented by one of the sponsors, it would help the podcast immensely if you would use my links to look into it or to make a purchase. Those links are available in the show notes of the podcast or audio player you're listening in right now and at juiceboxpodcast.com. It's a simple and easy way to support the podcast. I can't thank you enough for listening. Please make sure you're subscribed or following in your audio app. I'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast.